gotta leave your money behind you. Raise your hand to...
Welcome back to Give Me Some Truth. Dame la verdad. Dites-moi la vérité. The international version of Wagner Condon's award-winning personal finance podcast. I don't think it's won any awards, but
throwing it out.
Yeah. If you have an award and you'd like to give us one, we'll accept it. Today we're gonna kind of change things up a little bit. One of the big areas that people are looking to in Europe is Portugal, and because they have this 10-year NHR visa, and then Greece and Italy have also followed suit with similar plans. Another overlooked destination for retirement abroad is France, that you know pretty well.
Sure.
And so when people are looking at these choices, what are their kind of considerations, broadly speaking?
Yeah, I mean, they're all great choices because they provide the kind of lifestyle that people are, often looking for when they're moving to Europe, and they have low taxes in general, or, give you some sort of tax package that's very attractive, right? So today, I think what we're going to do is kind of, move away from those kind of big hot destinations and look at, things that are under the radar and that, people wouldn't necessarily think about, right?
Right.
And, when people think about low tax jurisdictions, obviously there's deals like Portugal and retirement visas in Greece and places like that. And then people think about Caribbean islands and, stuff like that. So today we're going to
Turks and Caicos.
Turks and Caicos. We're gonna be
We had
very
a great podcast with the folks from Bermuda a couple years ago.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So today we're going to be a lot less exotic, I guess, in our choice of destination, and we're going to really look for things that people wouldn't think about. And what's cool about our job is we talk to people in every corner of the world, and sometimes people come to us and it's like, you live where? And it's like the most random country that you don't really think about moving to, and yet there are hidden gems right out there, and people have been really very successful, both in terms of their financial situation and just getting to the type of lifestyle that they aim for, even in those kind of less known places, right? Places you wouldn't think about. And so that's why I like Stan's article. So Stan wrote an article to highlight 3 Eastern European jurisdictions that are surprisingly attractive from a tax standpoint. And we'd love to hear a bit more about your thoughts on those, Stan.
Yeah, and one other thing that we'll note that frequently happens, one of the reasons Portugal gets to be popular, and we're seeing people move from higher tax jurisdictions in terms of their states to these lower tax jurisdictions. And what it means is not necessarily that you're going to get rid of your U.S. taxes. Those will follow you everywhere, but you're not going to be hit with a higher tax bracket in the country that you move to. And in many cases, you're giving up having to pay state tax, which is ultimately a tax cut. So, now, one of the reasons Portugal is appealing to people moving from, say, California, a state with a high tax, rate, is the climate is very simple.
Similar.
The 3 places we're talking about may appeal more to maybe folks from our neck of the woods, where the weather
or the Rockies.
Yeah, or the Rockies, or where the weather is, finally here on
or
May
Alaska.
4th, we're having a spring day, it feels like.
Yeah.
But, in your article, you mentioned 3 countries, Bulgaria, Romania, and Hungary, correct?
Yes.
Which one do you want to start with? Let's go alphabetical order, or go with what you think.
Okay, I think that would be Bulgaria first, right?
That's my version of the alphabet, yes.
So my thoughts on this article were that I want to identify, the countries within the EU that where if you go and live there, then for all intensive purposes, you're just as well off tax-wise as if you lived in, Dubai or some other, tax haven that doesn't have an income tax, right? Because as Keith mentioned, as a U.S. expat, you're always paying U.S. taxes. So U.S. federal income tax is the floor, right? Yeah, but not necessarily the ceiling. If you live in most of Western Europe, there's a new ceiling for you, right? There's something higher that you're going to pay up above and beyond what your U.S. federal tax liability would be. And although there are certain programs in as you mentioned, Portugal and Italy and so on, eventually those fade away. So if you're really going somewhere to immerse yourself and spend, the rest of your life or a significant chunk of your life beyond what, maybe a decade, then these are even more attractive, right? Because these aren't special deals to try to draw people in. You're paying the same taxes that the citizens and residents of these countries are paying for being there, right?
And I would say then as well, this becomes an appealing destination for you if you're still working, if you're working remotely,
yes,
that sort of thing, because, some of these deals, France is great if you're a retiree, but if you're still working, you're going to pay high tax rates in France. If you're in Portugal and still working, after that 10 years runs out, you're into the higher, tax deal and so on. So this
and beyond income tax, right? I mean, we've often said, France is a wonderful place for an American to retire, but leave if you start to get sick because, it's not such a friendly country to die in, right? Because of the inheritance and gift taxes in the country, right? So I did, ferret out.
And yet don't leave if it's a minor illness because the French healthcare system is so
because don't come back to the U.S. because it's going to cost you 5 times as much. Sorry.
So Bulgaria, what's appealing about Bulgaria?
So I mean, the most appealing thing to on paper. I'm sure Bulgaria has so many things to offer people, and if you're, from or you have, ancestry from there, I mean, obviously there are these subjective matters, and I think where people want to live is somewhat, should be a subjective decision. But on paper, Bulgaria has a 10% flat income tax rate, right? Doesn't get much better than that.
Yeah,
No,
and so
I like that a lot.
to by flat income tax, that means no matter how much you make, you're paying 10% on your income. Does it matter the source of your income, which country? Are there differences for capital gains or not capital gains? Again, much like so it's the same thing.
That's right.
And then does
Take your pick.
Hungary also have a 10% flat tax rate?
No.
What is
Hungary has a 15% tax rate. I do believe that investment taxes are slightly lower, at least for dividends and interest, but ultimately you're paying a little bit more than Romania or Bulgaria. But again, under what is already your U.S. floor, right? Bulgaria and Hungary also do not have inheritance and gift taxes, right? So usually in these countries, you're going to have transfer or stamp taxes when, your home gets sold or disposed of when you die, right? That's about it, so you don't have to worry about, setting up a complicated, estate plan. They're in the EU, so if you want, your U.S., will to be effective, you can, use EU Directive 650/2012 and all of that. But so, Bulgaria and Romania, very, very, obviously friendly from an income tax standpoint and an inheritance or gift tax standpoint when you die. Hungary, slightly different, right? So you have a little bit higher income tax rate of 15%. That's max rate. And then technically there is inheritance and gift taxes, but they do not apply on transfers to lineals, and your spouse is included as a lineal, if you will, right?
So by lineal, you mean transfers to your children, transfers to your grandchildren,
transfers to your parents,
transfers to your parents,
right? Just along your bloodline, direct bloodline, right, and your spouse. So you don't have to worry as you would in, say, Germany, right? Mm-hmm. Which used to have part of Eastern Europe, right? Anyway, where if you die, you have to worry that your spouse is going to get taxed and then has to live on what's left, right? I mean, so it's they're all three extremely advantageous that way, and they're all under that U.S. floor. So really, I think that those three were easy choices, right? When it comes to ones that, from a financial advisory and a cross-border, tax advisory, type standpoint, these are obviously have a lot going for them. And being part of the EU means, look, one of the reasons why people, want to live in the countries in Europe that they live in, especially like in retirement, but also while working, is the opportunity to hop around the EU.
Sure.
It's one of the advantages of membership, if you will, right?
Right.
Is that if you've got a residence visa in one country, you're free to travel throughout the zone. So these are interesting countries.
Sure.
Yeah, I want to just take a step back from that, and because the EU, Stan mentioned something that Sil just recently published an article on,
Yes.
6/5/2012. And just for people who might not be familiar with that, this applies throughout the European Union, and it basically allows you to choose where you want to probate your will, correct?
Well, so EU Directive 650/2012 allows you to make an election of the succession law that is going to apply to the distribution of your estate, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that probate proceedings or the local equivalent of probate, however that looks. Many countries around Europe don't actually have what we would
Consider
refer to
probate.
as probate. It's a bit different. But it allows you to say, well, maybe I live in, Germany or Bulgaria, but, I happen to be American and I want U.S. succession law to apply to the distribution of my money when I'm gone, right? And that allows you to sidestep some of the restrictions that often apply in European countries, such as forced heirship, right? So if you wanted to leave everything to a trust, a U.S. charity, a friend from high school, I don't know, you would have that entire freedom under U.S. law. But you
Dog
wouldn't.
is not a lineal descendant, though, so you would
You
face
could-
estate tax.
Fair enough.
Fair enough. But you could potentially, under U.S. law, you could absolutely leave all your money to a dog. You set up a trust for the benefit of the dog, and the dog would be very well looked after. So that flexibility doesn't exist in every country around the world. But if you're able to make that election, then you have U.S. type freedom that could apply to your estate.
And the other thing is that it allows, if I remember, there's sort of an EU passport for you to register your home country will in your current country. So if you have a U.S. will drawn up, then you can basically, working with local counsel or a local notary or that sort of thing, have your U.S. will then registered in Bulgaria, Hungary, or Romania, right?
Yeah. So potentially, that's another potential benefit. So you have to work with a local expert to understand the logistics of applying that EU directive, locally, and it may look a little bit different from one country to the next. That's why it's important to get local advice. But that's yet another benefit of being in the EU. Some of the other
that
benefits
would be much less expensive than redrawing a whole new will. Generally, is
probably
finding out how do I register this will in the local jurisdiction.
correct.
Take that American will, register it in the local jurisdiction. Because one thing to make clear is you can't just have the idea going there that I'm going to use 6/5/2012 without explicitly declaring it.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah. It's you have to make that election. You can't just assume that it's going to apply by default. It will not. By default, it would be local law. And so, it's one of the other benefits of being in the EU. Some of the other things to consider is just from an immigration standpoint, right? And again, we're not immigration expert, but, obviously being in the EU means that if you, happen to hold an EU passport, then, you have full access to those countries, and that's obviously that's not a given for Americans, but, if you've lived in Portugal for a few years, maybe you've been able to secure Portuguese citizenship, right?
Yep.
Right.
So that's one of the other factors that make these countries attractive is potentially there's an easy way for you to actually move there,
Right.
and also we talked about lifestyle being a big factor in people considering their choice of destination, and part of that is cost of living. I think all three countries would be very different from many other European countries in terms of, the cost of living, and all three would rank really as, they're fairly cheap, right?
Beyond a doubt.
Yeah, and this has become one of the issues with, for example, Portugal, is so many people have been flooding in on this NHR program. Real estate prices that were once, very, very attractive have started going up. The general cost of living isn't terrible, but if you read the Portuguese newspapers and so on and so forth, there's starting to be complaints from the locals that they're being priced out a little bit of their own country.
Yeah, and they are. I mean, and it's the success of NHR has been good for the overall Portuguese economy, but obviously, the side effects and some of the local impacts of this have been that so many Americans and Brits and others, right, but really, like, it caught fire with Americans. And this is the first time that really there was an influx of Americans into Portugal. But the property market in both buying and renting in, I would say, the most popular parts of the country, which would be Lisbon, Cascais, Porto, and the Algarve, have gotten, so exorbitant that now the government, they're not ratcheting back NHR, but they're saying that if you're entering the country from an immigration standpoint on a golden visa, you cannot use you can't use purchasing property in one of these popular areas of the country to meet your investment requirement, right? So they're trying to do something to try to cool off a little bit, fan and cool off, what has been a red hot housing market that's basically gentrifying certain areas of the country.
Yeah. And so these are, I met, the housing market in Bucharest, for example, has not taken off in this way, and I can speak to, other, there are still markets, one of the things that for many young Americans, these destinations have that are appealing is the ability to live in a big city, not at U.S. big city prices. And if you're doing remote work and you mix in the fact that your taxes are going to be very low, all of a sudden, becomes a great place, even if you're not moving there permanently, to go work for a couple years. And you can rent an apartment, live in a big city, Bucharest and so on. These are major, cities that are growing, that are coming
rich
along.
in history, rich in culture.
Yep.
Really probably, phenomenal experiences, and by all accounts, we're not a travel agency, of course, right? But by all accounts, these countries are not, unfriendly to foreigners, and I think Hungary in particular is basically known for, the population being so friendly to outsiders that come in, a welcoming place, if you will. But again, we're kind of just providing a financial roadmap to places that if you're looking for Europe on the cheap would be of interest to you. I would fully encourage people to, go and spend some significant time in any country before you decide that you want to live there, and try to look at it from the lens of a non-vacationer too. Try to really dig in and see, how the people live day to day. Get to know some people, have conversations, and educate yourself in a very direct way, because part of this business, I'm sure you guys would agree, you run into people that are very excited about their expat journey, and then they get somewhere and they're not happy about it, right?
Right.
And that's a bad outcome, right? Because it takes a lot of work to get abroad, right? And once you're there and situated,
and
you want to have a great experience.
I think ultimately, by highlighting these destinations as well, and, coming to the end of our time here, but by highlighting these destinations as well, hopefully we're shining a light on, unknown destinations, but also just a reminder that picking where you're going to live solely because of tax reasons isn't the best choice, right?
No.
So you may like, these are good places to look at if you haven't considered them. If you're considering something like Germany, maybe look at, these additional places. But ultimately, if Germany is where your heart is, our job as financial advisors are to help you navigate, these restrictions that are different and don't always play well with U.S. laws and customs. So from that standpoint, thanks again, Stan and Sil, for sharing your information. Thanks again for joining us here on Give Me Some Truth International podcast.
Walkner Condon Financial Advisors is a registered investment advisor with the SEC. Registration with the SEC does not imply a certain level of skill or training. The opinions expressed by the participants of this podcast are their own and do not reflect the opinions of Walkner Condon Financial Advisors. All statements and opinions expressed are based upon information considered reliable, although it should not be relied upon as such. Any statements or opinions are subject to change without notice. Information presented is for educational purposes only and does not intend to make an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any specific securities, investments, or investment strategies. Investments involve risk and, unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. Information expressed does not take into account your specific situation or objectives and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for any individual. Listeners are encouraged to seek advice from a qualified tax, legal, or investment advisor to determine whether any information presented may be suitable for their specific situation. Past performance is not indicative of future performance. Thanks for listening, and for further information, please visit WalknerCondon.com.